in his footsteps.
Welcome back to the apprenticeship. We are continuing our journey in Jesus' footsteps through the Gospel of Luke. Today's reading takes us into the temple.
You can find today's passage in Luke chapter 2, verses 25 to 34. Luke tells us the story of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus going to the temple in Jerusalem. They go for Jesus' presentation and Mary's purification sacrifices. While they are there, they encounter Simeon. This man has a unique backstory that climaxes in him holding baby Jesus. As he holds Jesus, he praises God, blesses Joseph and Mary, and warns Mary. Let's have our son, Christopher, share a few of Simeon's words through this week's memory verse.
I have seen your salvation, which you have prepared for all people. He is a light to reveal God to the nations, and he is the glory of your people, Israel.
There are some interesting parallels between this story and the birth of John.
Yes, for instance, Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit, which inspired him to prophesy about John's special mission. Simeon was led by the Holy Spirit to the temple at just the right time to see Jesus.
That's right, Rebecca. Zechariah was inspired to prophesy that John would prepare the people for the Messiah's arrival. Simeon was inspired to testify that Jesus was salvation, that he was essentially the Messiah.
Luke uses these parallels to highlight the uniqueness of each child and the mission they will grow into. In today's passage, Luke signals to his readers, this is someone special. Establishing credentials achieves two things at once. Simeon is proving to be trustworthy, and Jesus' identity and mission are proven again to be true. So, Douglas, what are of some Simeon's credentials?
Well, for starters, Simeon is described as righteous and devoted. He has respectable character.
That's a good point. Simeon is also described as eagerly waiting for the Messiah to come and rescue Israel. He was someone who yearned for God's plan to come to pass.
He had been waiting his whole life to see the Messiah. I wonder if it was sometimes difficult for him to wait.
Isn't it for all of us sometimes? But waiting can have its benefits. Let me show you. How often have you watched the clock wishing time will go faster?
More than I can count.
Just like we wait for the right time on the clock, sometimes we have to wait for God's promises to be fulfilled. Waiting can be very difficult, but it is an important part of our faith journey. The hour hand represents our waiting time. It can seem like it moves so slowly, doesn't it? But just as each second on a clock is important, every moment we wait on God has purpose. Simeon waited his entire life to see the promised Messiah. When he saw Jesus in the temple, he praised God that his long wait was over. Waiting teaches us trust and perseverance.
That's so true. And while we wait, God is working in ways we might not see.
That's right. And just like the hands of the clock move steadily toward their goal, God's promises are always moving toward fulfillment.
Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing this illustration. Made so clear.
My pleasure.
Another part of Simeon credentials that Luke shares is the Holy Spirit. Luke reveals that the Holy Spirit was on Simeon. His relationship with God was such that God shared things directly with him. In verse 26, we learn that the Holy Spirit revealed to Simeon that he would not die before he saw the Lord's Messiah.
In verse 27, we see Simeon going to the temple as directed by the Holy Spirit. He was obedient. And finally, his words of praise reveal a deep understanding of scriptures, especially the book of Isaiah and its descriptions of the servant king to come.
So he was a man of character who watched for the Messiah. He had a close relationship with God and he knew the scriptures. What this highly credible man say?
Let's jump first to verses 30 to 32. Simeon's words come after Zechariah's song, which touched a little on the Messiah's mission. His words come after Mary's song, which highlighted the nature of the coming king and his kingdom. His words come after the angel song to the shepherds, which share the reach of God's intent toward humanity. In these instances, Luke hinted at a ground-shaking truth, that salvation is for all. Simeon now states this truth explicitly. He says that God's salvation has been prepared for all people. The Messiah is a light that reveals God to all nations. In other words, God's plan and purpose are all-inclusive. But in verses 34 to 35, Simeon warned that though the offer of salvation is universal, it will not be universally accepted.
That's right. Here the reader is alerted that this will be a story of conflict.
Simeon warned that when God's kingdom comes, it will be opposed by the world's kingdoms. It will be a clash of kingdoms. Even the little kingdom of the unrepentant heart will be in opposition to God's kingdom. It's like Luke is saying, buckle up, dear reader, you're in for quite a ride.
Our attention is caught all the more by Simeon's somber warning to Mary that she will painfully suffer for the collision of Jesus' mission and the world's agenda.
Now let's turn to Simeon's opening words in verse 29. Sovereign Lord, now let your servant die in peace, as you have promised. Simeon's words show us that he had a kingdom mindset. He referred to God as his sovereign Lord. Simeon knew that his sovereign was not Caesar or Herod. His sovereign was God. And he viewed himself as a servant of the King of the universe.
Jesus would have looked very different from what was generally expected. But when Simeon saw this poor, ordinary family arrive in the temple, he did not falter, question, or doubt. He accepted.
And like Simeon, we can also acknowledge the supremacy of our King and his kingdom. And we can practice wholeheartedly accepting his ways of accomplishing his plans.